If you're struggling to forgive someone for an insult or injury or hurt done to you in the past, you are definitely not alone. This is a really common and tricky problem for a lot of people, in large part because the concept of forgiveness itself is kind of confusing and vague. Now, there's good reason for this, because depending on the culture you grew up in, or the families and communities you were a part of, or even the religion you grew up in, if you grew up in a religious household, that can play a role in how we think about or don't think about what forgiveness is, how to do it, and how to do it well. Luckily, there's a psychological approach to forgiveness that in my own work with my clients, I have found to be extremely clarifying and helpful. Hi, my name is Wignall. I'm a psychologist and the founder of The Friendly Mind, a free weekly newsletter where I share practical, evidence-based advice for emotional health and resilience. In the rest of this video, I'm going to share 3 of the most important ideas for working through forgiveness in a healthy and effective way. Number 1, forgiveness is a behavior, not a feeling. Probably the number one biggest obstacle I see to people working through forgiveness in a healthy way is confusion about what forgiveness actually is. Like, what type of thing is it exactly? Most people understand on some level that there is a behavioral component to forgiveness, but mostly they tend to think about forgiveness in terms of how they want to feel. An event or a memory becomes resolved and they don't have to think about it anymore, or it doesn't produce any emotion, any anxiety, any anger, any guilt, any sadness, any other type of uncomfortable emotion. For example, I once worked with a young woman who was a client of mine, and she wanted to forgive her parents. She was struggling to forgive her parents for not being as attuned to her needs when she was a child as she thought they should have been. But when we discussed this idea more deeply, it became pretty apparent to both of us that what she actually wanted was simply to just not feel as bad, as angry, as sad, as disappointed about her relationship with her parents when she was a kid. Another client of mine who I worked with on forgiveness was an older gentleman, and he said that what he was struggling with was to forgive his best friend for having an affair with his wife about 30 years ago. But the more we talked about this, and the more he kind of shared his story and his experience trying to come to forgiveness with his best friend and his wife, it turns out what he actually wanted was to stop experiencing these memories of the time when the affair actually happened and all of the kind of anger and disappointment that came with those recurring memories. One more example was a client of mine who really struggled with forgiving himself for an incident about 10 years previously when he was a student where he cheated on a big important exam. But unsurprisingly, as we started to discuss things in more depth, it turns out what he really wanted was to just stop feeling so guilty for this thing he did. I share these examples because I think they really illustrate well why most people struggle to achieve forgiveness. People think they want to forgive, but really what they want is emotional relief. Now, this is totally understandable, of course, as all of us have in some way had, bad things happen to us, people have hurt us, and it's understandable to want relief from the emotions that come along with that experience. And I do think that to some extent, emotional relief does come when you learn to get better at forgiving. But that's never going to happen if you're mixing up cause and effect, or as the old saying goes, putting the cart before the horse. Because from a psychological perspective, forgiveness is a behavior, not a feeling. It's something you do, not something that happens to you. So if you genuinely want to forgive someone, the first thing you need to get in the habit of doing is reminding yourself that all you can control is what you do or do not do. You have no control over the outcome, how you feel after forgiving someone, how someone else feels after you forgive them, how they behave after you forgive them. None of that is under your control. All you can control is what you do. Now, at this point, the question I usually get asked is something along the lines of, okay, that makes sense, but what exactly do I do to forgive? What does it look like exactly? This is tricky because while forgiveness is a behavior, it's not a physical behavior. Of course, you can tell someone you forgive them, so you can verbalize your forgiveness. And in that sense, it is a kind of physical behavior, but that's not essential to forgiveness. You can forgive someone even if they are long dead and gone from your life. Fundamentally, forgiveness is a mental behavior. It means taking control of your attention and not letting it obsess unhelpfully over past injuries. To make this a little more concrete, let me walk you through a few examples of what this could look like. So let's say you are at work and you have a coworker who insulted you in some way, maybe in front of other people. And so it really stung. But you want to forgive them and move past it, in part because you want to be able to work effectively with this person. So the way you might do that is anytime a memory of that insulting comment comes up, maybe like when you go into that type of meeting once a week, you tend to have a memory triggered of that time when they insulted you. You deliberately choose, you can feel your attention go toward that memory, and you say to yourself, nope, I'm not going to go there. It's not going to be helpful. I'm going to refocus my attention on the to-dos for this meeting, for instance. That's forgiveness. Or let's say you want to forgive an old boyfriend for cheating on you. What you would do, literally what you would do, the act of forgiveness is anytime a memory of that incident pops up, you accept it. You go, okay, there it is. It's normal to have that memory, but I'm not going to focus on it. I know that's not helpful. I'm going to refocus on what I'm doing right now in the moment. Or take the example of if you want to forgive yourself, maybe for treating someone else poorly in the past. You know, we've all been there to some extent. It means being willing to stop obsessing over that fault or mistake or mean thing you did in the past and criticizing yourself for it, and instead shifting your attention onto something more helpful and productive in the present. In short, forgiveness means taking responsibility for your attention. Now, having heard that, the next thing that tends to come into people's minds when I describe forgiveness like this is, okay, well, I've basically done that, but it still doesn't feel like I've truly forgiven them. This is usually because of another common misconception about forgiveness, which we're going to look at in the next point. Number 2, forgiveness is a commitment, not an event. My experience is that most people who want forgiveness actually want forgetfulness. That is, they want not to have to experience the painful memories and maybe present interactions that remind them of that insult or injury or bad thing that happened to them. And they think, again, this is partly understandable because it's such an uncomfortable position to be in, they think there's some sort of secret approach, either a spiritual one or a psychological one or whatever it may be, that will somehow allow them to achieve that and have it no longer be an issue so they can just move on with their lives. Understandably, that's what a lot of people want. Unfortunately, that is not how the human mind works. Unless you have some sort of very serious neurological condition, you are not just going to forget some serious insult or injury done against you. In fact, that's exactly the type of thing you're more likely to remember because it was so emotionally evocative. So tempting as it may be, you really got to watch out for this sort of hidden expectation that if you just find the right technique or approach to forgiveness, you'll be able to avoid all the memories and emotions that go along with having been hurt. If someone has wronged you, you will always have to live with that memory and the emotion it triggers. Now, you're probably hearing that and you're thinking, God, that sounds pretty bleak. Not really, actually, because of the way forgiveness works. While it's true that that memory is probably not going anywhere, it will come up from time to time throughout your life. And along with it, there will be difficult emotions, for sure. That's not going away entirely. That doesn't mean that you can't reduce, often pretty significantly, both the frequency and intensity of those memories and the emotions that go with them. I think about it like this. If you talk to someone who has successfully forgiven someone, what they will often say when you ask them how they did it and what it's like is something along these lines. They'll say, like, sure, I still think about it from time to time. And when I do, like, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt at all. It still hurts a little bit, but it really doesn't bother me that much. I feel it, and then I kind of move on with my life. So I think the optimistic take here is that even though it's not possible to completely eradicate any memory or emotion associated with a harm done against you, you can dramatically reduce the extent to which those memories and the emotions that go with them bother you and impact your life. Commit to forgiveness as a process, not an event. Because of the fact that you will always have memories and emotions associated with the harm done against you, and for many people, you will still have to regularly interact with the person who harmed you or injured you in some way. Forgiveness, by definition, can't be a one-time event. Instead, you should think of it as a process, something you commit to doing repeatedly. The analogy for this that I like to use is healthy eating. We're at the time of this recording anyway, we're getting to the end of the year and we're getting close to the beginning of the new year, which is when people traditionally make New Year's resolutions and start thinking about goals and aspirations for personal growth in their future. And healthy eating is a really common goal that a lot of people have, right? Now, the first thing I'll say about healthy eating is, like our first point earlier, healthy eating is a behavior. It's something you do. It's not something that happens to you. And while you undoubtedly want the benefits that come from healthy eating, whether that's, lower blood pressure or better energy or just looking better in a swimsuit this summer, it would be a big mistake to confuse the act of healthy eating with the effects that you hope will come from that. Okay, so that's the first way in which it's a good analogy. But the second part, more importantly to our point now, is that healthy eating, it's not a one-time thing. Sure, January 1st rolls around and you make a big, serious intention. Okay, I'm committing to healthy eating this year. That's great, but that's one time. If you are going to succeed at healthy eating, you're going to have to make that decision multiple times, maybe dozens of times every single day for the foreseeable future. It is not a one-time thing. It's a process. And the people, in my experience, who are successful at embracing kind of a healthy eating routine, they understand that and they figure out ways to stick with the process, not just the big rah-rah intention right off the bat. Well, I think forgiveness is really similar, actually. First of all, like we said, it's something you do. And you got to be clear on not confusing the action part of forgiveness from the effects you hope it will bring. Feeling better about things, not being as caught up on it, being able to move on from things. Those are all effects. The actual act of forgiveness is a behavior, a thing you do, just like healthy eating. But more than that, you need to come to terms with the fact that it is something you are going to have to repeatedly do. It's not a one and done. And while you might not have to do it dozens of times per day, like healthy eating, right? It will probably come up quite frequently. I don't know if you've had something, a major harm or insult done against you, even if it was a long time ago, there's probably lots of things that can trigger memories of that. So you should expect, once a week, maybe once a month, a few times a year, but it's going to happen repeatedly. And so you need to commit to forgiveness as a repeated set of actions, something you have to do continually. So here's how I think about it with that in mind. Forgiveness is a commitment to managing your attention well anytime you're reminded of the harm done against you. Luckily, like most commitments or habits, it gets a lot easier the more you do it. It doesn't necessarily get easy, but it can get dramatically easier if you accept and commit to it as a process and kind of get rid of this wishful thinking about, if I just do the right thing or have the right approach, poof, I'll do one thing and then it's gone. No. If you've been hurt and you want to forgive, you are going to have to commit to forgiving. So just like healthy eating or regular exercise or playing the piano or learning to speak French, forgiveness is about committing to positive behavior in a sustainable way. Number 3, forgiveness is about the future, not the past. I want you to imagine two different people, both of whom have been deeply hurt by someone in the past and are struggling to forgive and move on from it. The first person, we'll call her Serena. Now, Serena I want you to imagine this, she's a high school history teacher. She loves her job. She's very passionate about it. She's also very active in her local community. She's raising 3 young kids, an experience she describes as quote unquote awesome, but it's also clearly very stressful, in part because she doesn't make a ton of money as a single mom working as a high school history teacher, you can imagine. And so she's always worried about finances and money and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of stress in her life because of that. She's currently dating someone, and while she doesn't have a ton of time for herself, including her relationships, she really enjoys this person and thinks there's a pretty good chance that they could have a real future together as a couple. Now I want you to contrast Serena with Robert. Now, Robert is a partner at a very prestigious law firm. He really enjoys the prestige and the income that comes from being a successful trial attorney at a big firm. He currently lives with his wife, with whom he describes having a stable but distant relationship. He plays golf most weekends with some buddies, but outside of that, doesn't really have a lot of hobbies. He says that he is looking forward to retiring, but can't really articulate why, other than less stress. Now, if you had to guess, which of our two people will be most likely to succeed in forgiving? Of course, there's a ton we don't know, but my bet would be on Serena because she has something that, in my experience, working with a lot of people who've been struggling with this dilemma of how to genuinely forgive someone and move on, she's got something that's very predictive of success with that. See, even though she's very stressed and she's pretty overwhelmed, in general, she feels like her life is on a good trajectory. And if she can kind of hang in there, she feels things are really going to get better in the future. That's fundamentally how she feels about her life. And when you spend time around her, there's this sense, this really strong sense, that she's kind of actively pushing her life forward into a better future. In other words, she's an optimist about her own life. But when you think about Robert, even though he is similarly stressed, he's got a lot of stress in his life, different type of stress, of course, but still a significant amount of stress in his life, he doesn't seem to have much that he looks forward to. Like when you spend time around him, you almost get the sense that he's just sort of getting through life or sort of floating through life. Or put another way, he's kind of apathetic about his own life. I've found that people who are successfully able to forgive something in the past have a fundamentally future-focused orientation to life. They have a strong sense of agency and forward momentum in the way they go through life. And it's almost as if somehow putting time and energy into the future, imagining the future, working toward the future, simply being excited about the future, makes it easier to let go of the past. On the other hand, I found that people who really struggle to forgive and can't quite get over things, they often spend a lot of time in the past. A lot of their time and attention and energy is spent dwelling on the past. And their futures seem kind of hollow or poorly defined or even empty or vague. The more general principle here, I think, is this. It's hard to let go of the past when you don't have much to look forward to in the future. Now, the implication of all this for forgiveness, I think, is that the more clarity you have about your goals, your aspirations, your values, and just your overall vision for your future, the easier it will be to do that fundamental act of forgiveness, which, remember, as we talked about earlier, means acknowledging that your mind is being pulled towards something in the past, but then intentionally redirecting it away from that because it's not helpful and putting it on something that is productive or meaningful or enjoyable in the present moment or even in the future. At the end of the day, forgiveness is about your future, not your past. It's about choosing to live your life according to what you really want, rather than being consumed by the past and everything you don't want. Bonus idea: forgiveness does not require reconciliation. I always get this question, so I figured I would preempt it and head it off while I'm still doing this video. So people usually ask some version of, what if I forgive someone, but they don't acknowledge it, or they don't accept it, or they don't admit that they even did anything wrong? As much as you want reconciliation or even restitution, or maybe just simply acknowledgement of harm done against you, it's really important to remember that that is a separate thing from forgiveness. Whether someone acknowledges or accepts or even acts on your forgiveness, it's not up to you, and it's not a fundamental requirement for forgiveness, for the act of forgiving. So my last piece of advice would be, don't make reconciliation a prerequisite for forgiveness. All right, thanks for watching this video. If you are in the process of beginning to try and forgive someone and you're looking for some sort of support about how do I actually reach out to them, I want to do it verbally, I want to actually tell them I forgive them for something and have a conversation. As you know, that can be pretty daunting, pretty anxiety-inducing, a difficult conversation like that. So to help, I've got a resource that I call the Assertive Communication Cheat Sheet. Assertive communication is this huge, big topic that I talk a lot about, but basically it's about how do you become confident communicating what you want in a way that's honest to yourself, but also respectful of the other person. And this is really important for difficult kind of forgiveness conversations, I found. So I've put together a little guide. It lists kind of the key things to remember and keep in mind as you go into a difficult conversation, like forgiving someone. And I think it can be really helpful, if you're looking to do that and having a hard time. I'll put a link to download that guide in the description below. Finally, the last thing I'll say is if you enjoyed this video and my approach to emotional health generally, I have a video about another topic that's different but often related, and that is grief and loss, and specifically how to navigate grief and loss in a psychologically and emotionally healthy way. And so if you're interested in that topic, check out this video. I think you'll really like it.